Hey, everybody. So if you have been hanging out with us for the last couple seasons of the podcast, you probably remember us mentioning Flaututi in our past episodes. Our friend Molly Sharp, who incidentally was also a guest in season 1, started Flaututi to share her awesome duet arrangements of standard viola rep, which are great for teaching, and it has now grown into a wide-ranging catalog of one-of-a-kind resources for violists and beyond. Steph, do you remember when we played one of the duets from a holiday bundle together?
Yes, it's one of my most cherished holiday memories.
Aww.
But actually, one of my favorites is something that all string instrumentalists would love. It's called Making Double Stops Ring, a guided exploration of just intonation. And Molly actually shared the viola version with us last year, and I am not exaggerating when I say that it completely changed the way I think about intonation. No one has ever explained it to me like this before. I think that we all realize on some level that a B in all situations is not the same, but why?
Yeah. Have you ever had that classic argument in a string quartet setting when you're trying to tune a chord and maybe we're playing that B and we're being told, no, it needs to go lower. No, it needs to go higher. It needs to go here. Wouldn't it be amazing to save all those hours for our string quartet students with no debate? We just know where it's supposed to go. Everyone agrees because there's only one way.
Right. You can just gift them copies of this book.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing personal. Just here's a book about intonation. Well, Molly has made it easy for all of us to play in tune. So whether you play viola, violin, cello, or bass, there's a version for you. You can find this pragmatic book, viola duet arrangements of classic viola repertoire, and so much more at vlatutti.com under Marketplace, or look in this episode's show notes. Have you ever worn those big blow-up compression socks? That's something they do like for football players and stuff. They put them in.
Are they like inflated?
Yes. So it's like a one pant situation that you put on and you put one on each leg and they go all the way up to your thigh.
Yeah.
Or they can go all the way up to your thigh. And then there's a machine that I think it just like compresses. I think it's for circulation.
Yeah, that sounds right. I just had a conversation about compression socks when I was at the beach. We were talking about how my grandmother like refused. She tried them on once and she was like, no, not doing that. Family friend of ours, her husband had to get some surgeries and things like that. It's really terrible circulation. And that doctor, who's like a University of Pennsylvania doctor, was like, if I had it my way, every human being on the planet would wear compression socks all the time.
Why?
Because of how bad our circulation gets as we get older.
Oh.
So if you do it preventatively, I guess it keeps that from happening. So maybe we do need to try the thigh-high compression tubes.
I can barely wear pantyhose.
I know.
Like knee highs.
I know. I thought about it. I was like, well, maybe there's a reason no one wants to wear them and we just let our bodies age.
You know what we need is we need the Kardashians to come up with and start wearing compression socks.
Sexy ones. Sexy compression socks.
Sexy compression socks.
Yep.
Or tights for everyone. And then you wouldn't be able to keep them in stores.
That's true. That's 100% true.
They just need the right like image, marketing.
Yeah. The right person. Maybe that'll be our calling. Extra toasty Cheez-Its and the new stylish compression socks.
Sponsors, if you're out there, we will hawk your wares. Welcome to the Viola-centric podcast. We are two curious violists exploring the art of connection through conversations with each other and our friends. I'm Stephanie Knutson.
And I'm Liz O'Hara Starr, and we're both professional freelance musicians living in the DC metro area.
I just think it's funny how in this area it's like one plague after another. So, okay, we had like a legitimate plague, right?
Yes.
And then it's all the pollen, right? And it's been really intense. I mean, I usually don't have allergy symptoms and my eyes have been killing me the last couple of days. Just really, really, really scratchy and itchy. And then we have the cicadas coming.
Here it comes.
In like mid-May, we're going to be set upon by a brood. I mean, what is more like ominous sounding than a brood of cicadas? But this brood has been hibernating underground for 17 years. And I remember the last time they were around. And it was like apocalyptic. Maybe that's dramatic, but they were like everywhere. You could not walk on the sidewalk without crunching these like alien looking little husks, animals. And it's like, oh my God.
Super, super crazy. I didn't live down here yet. I was still finishing up school, and it was like July. It was like at the peak of their dying off, which is what it's called. I looked it up.
Oh God.
And my mom, one of her sisters and their family were in town. And I'm from Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is about 2 hours away. So whenever somebody would come and visit from far away, we would take them down to DC and we'd do like an overnight. We'd always stay in Bethesda and ride the metro in and all that, see the monuments and stuff. So we're like, we're going to go do this.
Little did you know.
And I remember that so distinctly. Like, it was so loud, and also the crunching. The crunching was disturbing. Every sidewalk.
And anyone will tell you that if you have like a dog, dogs go crazy for these cicadas, and they will eat as many as they can.
No!
Yes.
Really?
Yes. It's like, I don't know, Cheetos.
Oh my God.
Extra toasty Cheez-Its.
Extra toasty Cheez-Its. Bringing it back.
It's a delicacy. People eat them too.
Oh, what? No, they don't.
Girl, they do.
Like here?
Google it. Yes.
Why?
Yes. I don't know, the novelty.
Well, also, I mean, I know about the cricket thing and the protein, and
yeah,
I guess it's...
Oh, I'm telling you, cicadas is like, it's a delicacy.
This is not a thing we're going to try.
That would make really, really good reel, though.
Yes. Us, like, trying to bite into a cicada.
You should totally do it.
Oh, I can't.
I will do it if you do it.
Oh, God, okay. I have to think about it. Can we roast them?
Yes.
Do we have to eat them raw?
No, oh my God, no.
Okay.
I don't think I could do that.
If we roast them and season them, maybe I'll do it.
Okay. You guys heard it here.
This is an exploration for us for the podcast going forward. One of the parts of our experiences together could be doing insane things, like our friends the other night were telling Stephanie and I.
Oh, yes.
We should do a live video of the two of us getting in a hyperbaric chamber.
No, not hypobaric. A cryo.
Oh, yeah, cryo.
Because I've done it, and Liz has not done it.
No. And Stephanie's description of it sounds like my nightmare, but... Then what you said was, if someone's there talking to you, it's probably less miserable because you're only in there for how long?
3 minutes tops.
But it felt like an eternity, right?
Oh my God. Yes. But I'm telling you, you would be like the perfect person to bring with, because you would be able to just like blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
And asking questions. And yes, I think, yeah, you should hire yourself out as like a cryo companion.
I just have this mental image of us both like taking turns, and then the person who's talking to the other person is just like documenting the experience.
Yes.
It's worth thinking about.
So, you guys, let us know if this is the kind of content you want to see from us.
Us eating cicadas.
Eating cicadas. Doing cryo.
Yep. Let us know if this is something you're interested in.
Oh, tell me about your weekend in PA.
Oh, it was so great. Okay, well, actually, I was going to tell you about the craziest day I had on Friday.
Tell me.
From start to finish, it was a crazy day. And the precursor to this is that I was awake for about 21 and a half hours.
Oh my gosh.
It was insane. So I was out the door by 7:45 because I was driving out of town in the opposite direction of Pennsylvania, where I was headed later, for a recording job. And I get to my car, and about 1.5 feet behind the trunk of my car, there's this little nestling bird on the pavement. So I'm like, oh no, this little thing died, and I was really sad. And then I saw it move. I was like, oh my gosh, it's still alive. So I kind of like picked him up very gently, put him in my hand, raced back into the house, and I was like, Matt, get up! There's a baby bird, and I need you to hold it because I have to go. So he gets...
Good morning, I love you. Here's an injured bird. Bye.
Runs downstairs. He's like, what's happening right now? Oh my God, what's happening? And he like goes in the kitchen and he grabs this like plastic bowl. And I was like, no, you can't put it in a plastic bowl. You have to hold it. It's a baby and it's alone. And so I get in the car and immediately I call the Animal Welfare League of Arlington, which shout out, they're just a fantastic organization here. This bird, I called Matt and he's like, yeah, he's like flapping his little tiny wings. He's lifting his head. He's moving around. Like he didn't actually appear to be injured at all. But of course he was like a baby, so he needs to be fed. So this guy from Animal Welfare League came, picked him up, and they take them to a wildlife rehabilitation center. Now, I don't know the outcome. You know, you never know. I mean, they're these little tiny creatures, but I think this little thing had like thrive in his bones. Like he was just like, I'm good. You could get me to somewhere warm and some food and I'll be good. So I like to think that he's going to go on and live a nice, happy life. Nice. And then I showed up at my recording job and there was a violinist on the job who had infant, like 10-day-old kittens in her possession she was fostering. And so I walk in and she's bottle feeding this little kitten. We have pictures of all the baby animals.
Oh my God. We'll put them on our Instagram.
I'm like holding this little thing in my hands. Again, it's like just the size of the palm of my hand, this little tiny thing. And for those of you who don't know, I have 2 cats and my husband found them on the side of the road when they were about 2.5 weeks old. So I was having lots of flashbacks to that because we had to formula feed them and it was a whole thing. But oh my gosh, they were so cute and precious.
Oh my gosh. So you're basically like Snow White.
Yes.
You sing, you open your mouth, you go outside, and like injured and baby animals just come into your presence.
Exactly. That's how I felt. I know. I was like, wow, something's happening here today. The energy of this day is very strange. Let's see. I came out of my job and a couple of us were towed erroneously. And I was on a bit of a time crunch because I was south of home and I needed to get in the car with Matt and drive north of home after that. But you know what? It was an extra hour and a half and I had a chance to sit down and have lunch with my good friend Molly Sharp.
Oh, nice. Friend of the pod.
So that was great. Molly, thank you for taking me to the impound lot and staying with me because tow places are super shady and scary.
For real.
And then I drove home in Friday traffic, but got home. We got in the car. HOV is a wonderful thing. So our drive to Pennsylvania was actually super easy. And we took Matt's mom out for an early Mother's Day dinner.
Oh, how nice.
It was lovely. And then we went and visited friends and stayed up entirely too late for how old we are now.
Oh my goodness.
Hence the 21 hours of being awake. But it was a blast. And then Saturday was also fantastic. The weather was beautiful. Matt won his doubles horseshoe tournament.
Whoa.
So congrats to Matt.
So where can I watch this on ESPN?
Yeah. You know what? I'm certain that there's some horseshoe pitching going on ESPN.
I bet you there are.
Maybe not this tournament. Yeah, Matt had a great time. I got to see some people that I know from, growing up there. For a minute, we weren't all really hanging out at that event. They were trying to keep it small. But I saw my best friend and visited with her and her niece and her daughter, and we had a nice dinner. I mean, it was awesome all around. Lots of visiting, lots of peace. My in-laws live at the foot of the Blue Mountains. They have this huge property back there, and so you just wake up and you're like in the woods. It was awesome.
Whoa, that's a good story.
Right? Kind of nuts.
Yeah.
Anyway, what did you think of our conversation with Kayleigh?
Oh my gosh. She knows so much about the body, about movement. I was really just completely just soaking it all in.
Yeah.
I mean, she was talking about things that I know the name of, but I never knew anything more than like just a surface level amount of information about them. And she was just so knowledgeable. And clearly this is a passion of hers.
Yeah. I feel like you could spend an entire week learning from Kayleigh and you still wouldn't probably get all of the information that's in there.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like we talked about so much. We talked about how we're all going to be going back to playing more and what do we need to do to get ready for that. We talked about the importance of mind-body connection, which I think we're all kind of guilty of just going through the motions and not really thinking about what's doing the work for us.
Totally. That is a huge concept. It's that like knowledge of how things work and how to use that to your benefit, in so many ways. Even just sitting and standing and walking.
Right, which are things that everyone does and all musicians do.
Yeah.
Not just violists, but we all need to know the way that our body moves, at least on some level.
Oh, yeah. And thinking about it in terms of like optimal care for your body so that you can do the thing you love. That was something that really stuck with me, was how do you motivate people to think this way? Well, it's that idea, right? I mean, our bodies are the vehicles for expressing what it is we want to express. I cannot believe it's May 2021. We're going to record this month and then we're going to take a little break. So I was thinking that this is a great episode to have as we sort of wrap up this like first unofficial season of our podcast, because it kind of plants some seeds for people over the summer who want to kind of get back in shape, who want to think about what it's going to look like in the fall, because I am feeling a little optimistic that we're going to be doing a little more work in the fall, you know?
Yep.
So knowing that that's upon us in a lot of areas, and then thinking ahead. And I will say, I know that over the summer, there are many outlets for learning online. And I did that all last summer, and it was so wonderful for me. Like I saw an ad for the Karen Tuttle workshop, and I absolutely loved that. It was so fantastic. So if you're thinking of doing something like that, do it. Now, there's no better time than now because everything is online. You could do it from your home. You can turn your video off and play while people are getting a master class. You could try to learn what they're learning. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing the resources that are there.
We'll have some mini content that might be coming out in between our formal next season and the end of this one. So to kind of, keep in you guys' feed, and we would have withdrawal, honestly.
Yes. It's such a weird thing to say we're going to take a break because it's so much fun, but it'll be good for us too to kind of like recharge and
bring you even more exciting, inspiring topics next season.
Definitely.
And we have one more episode with one more guest.
We have a big guest coming up.
I don't know. Should we tell them now?
No.
Nope. Okay. You're going to have to wait.
We never do. It's just going to have to be a surprise, everybody.
I love it. So you have to tune in, you guys. Very excited.
It's a guest that when you think about a first year of viola-centric podcast,
this person has to be on it.
Has to be on it. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Well, enjoy this conversation with Kayleigh. She's amazing. We'll leave all of her contact information in the notes so you know how to reach her.
As always, we'd love to know what you think. In fact, I didn't want to forget to mention this. We have received some feedback about our episode with Stephen Slater. If you have comments, questions, things you want to share with us, we are going to do a mailbag episode at the end of the season. So it's not too late. Reach out, send us a message, write us an email. As always, we're around. We love to hear feedback. And yeah, thanks so much for listening.
It's a mix. When you talk to people, they're like, just cannot wait to get back. Or they're like, you know what? This is okay with me. I have other things going on. It's kind of nice to do something different. Is that the camp that you fall in?
I think it's more that my career is not solely built on performance. So I am not maybe struggling as much as some people are. It's more than 2/3 of my income, but I have taught stuff for a long time. So I have another source of income that I can rely on. So I feel very fortunate in that sense.
Right.
Yeah. I think it probably makes sense for us to back up a little bit. You formed Musicians Health Collective before the pandemic.
Yes.
This is something that you've been aware of and kind of promoting for a lot longer than I think many of us were even really paying attention, which is amazing. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about how that got started?
Sure. So at the risk of sounding like a complete jerk, I started the blog because I accidentally won a position from the first professional orchestra audition I took, which was San Antonio. I took it on a whim after I was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor the year before, and I was like, I'm not going to do this. I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. Because one of the main side effects for me with that particular tumor is it was really altering my cortisol levels. So my stress hormone in the context of performance and audition was really out of control.
Wow.
In a way that I'd never experienced before. And so for those of you who don't know, pituitary is in your brain, regulates a lot of hormones. And so I just didn't know if it would be physically possible for me to even audition without like losing all my marbles. So after a year of being treated, I thought, well, let's just see what happens, like no expectations. And then I fortuitously won a position out of that. And I was like, okay, well now what? So that's kind of how that was launched, is because I had actually been teaching just exclusively yoga at that point for 4 years, and I had done a lot of studying into anatomy, and I was like, there's all this missing information out there. and I just want to share what I'm learning, but without huge cost to consumer. That's kind of how it started, is not necessarily from positing myself as this brilliant expert, but just like, this is what I'm learning, this is what I'm noticing, and this is what it's like applied to an orchestral career. Because a lot of the people who do write about musician health, they might be doctorates at a university and they're teaching private students, but they maybe don't play professionally full time. This is my perspective, and it's different from that of a clinician who's coming at it from a degree or a DPT or an occupational therapy degree. This is my experience. I don't make money off of the site, so there's no ads, there's no huge revenue, and I started to feel horrible asking people to write for no money. And it's one of the things that I sort of decided, unless somebody was really, really wanting to write something for me, I just kind of stopped having guests. But initially there was a lot more guest posting, thus the concept of collective. And I think with that, I also believe that no person in this field should be an expert. I think it should be a collective experience, and that we should all look at our different models of expertise and work together. Because I never wanted to position myself as this like all-knowing person, which is perhaps why I don't like to sell things.
Oh, it's so great because there's just so much to learn. And this idea that there was a central resource that you were building, sometimes I get a little overwhelmed actually when I think about the grand spectrum of health and well-being and how all-encompassing that is for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, whether it's managing stress or understanding physical challenges or the psychology of playing or whatever it might be, whether it was your intention or not, I think you've really built a name for yourself just by being open with this information as someone that people look to have resources for them. That's really great. And not to mention that you're a violist too. So
added bonus.
Right. It's awesome. And you also launched a podcast around the same time we did, actually. When I went back and looked, I was like, oh, we're all kind of jumping into this pool at the same time.
Yeah, I launched that with a physical therapist. She works at Colburn.
You guys are covering everything from mental health. You just had an audiologist on to talk about ear protection and what that looks like for musicians. And I have to say that one kind of resonated with me because she said something like, you only ever think about what it's like when you're actually sitting in the gig and how loud it is in that moment, but you don't think about your intake in all the other parts of your life.
Sure.
And I'm like a loud music in the car person, and I never think about it, like, ever. I'm like, this is probably just as bad, if not worse. I think that's so fantastic that there's that resource there too. So you also are trained in other types of movement, right? So you started with yoga.
Yes. It's like, you don't even know what to say. You're like, other things. You have all these trainings.
Yeah, where do we go with everything you've done? It's kind of awesome.
It's weird, yeah. I started as a yoga teacher 10 years ago, and that was because yoga was really helpful for me initially. I played competitive tennis in my youth, and when that was kind of done, I didn't know what to do with myself. And fast forward to college and music, no one ever tells you what to do with your body. And I went to NEC, and there's the YMCA next door, and pretty much all the musicians just got on the elliptical. So I was like, well, that's what we do. We like get a magazine or a score and we sit on the elliptical. And so that's what I did. And I didn't particularly like it, but it was just kind of like, well, this is what air quotes exercise is. So this is what we do. And I remember a few times that I tried to like crawl into the weight space just to do some like very tame like lat pull downs and things like that. Either being the only woman there or being mansplained hardcore, just feeling tremendously uncomfortable. Yeah. So obviously that wasn't super accessible or open to me at that time. A few years later, one of my classmates at NEC did a yoga teacher training, and she's like, I think you'll really like him. You have this background in strength and blah, 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 try it. And I really enjoyed it. And I think part of the enjoyment came from having been a victim of sexual assault. And that was a way for me to start to unpack this embodiment task. And that was kind of where my interests were for those first few years. So that's 2007, a long time ago. And I think yoga was a way for me to start to become embodied and reclaim my physical body after feeling really disembodied after being assaulted. So that was kind of the entry point. And the years that followed, I started to realize that I was less interested in yoga alone and more interested in movement and embodiment in whatever form that took. And that was kind of an epiphany, which is that yoga works for some people, other people hate it. I'm somewhere in the middle. So I started expanding just my interests and looking at different teachers and people outside of yoga and different approaches to movement. And I really enjoyed that, and my body responded really well. So eventually I went on to do comprehensive Pilates teacher training and strength training and kettlebells and all sorts of other stuff. But it comes back to this curiosity as to what is the best way for someone to move, what works for them, what does it mean for individual people to become embodied, what does strength mean, and, like finding individualized solutions. So that's kind of what led the last 10 years of movement trainings for me.
Right now, there's a lot of people who aren't doing a whole lot of playing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not moving our body as much as we did maybe last year or the year before. What should people start doing just to get themselves ready for maybe a next season?
There's kind of two parts of it. What are people's current exercise situation? That's kind of file one. And then what is their playing situation? That's part two. So I would guess that most people have some form of movement that they do. It might even just be walking the dog. Something that they enjoy. It could be dancing in their house, whatever. Whatever they've been doing, that's kind of important information. And then how much playing they've been doing. And with that, what we're looking at is increasing the volume of playing music over time gradually. And how frequent are they playing? What is the intensity of the playing? What is the volume of playing? And what are the physical skills that are needed for those tasks? As violists, what I am interested in for people is some kind of spinal strength and awareness. That can take many forms. A deadlift, Pilates core work, some yoga, some kind of spine connection, backline connection, and some kind of shoulder thing, strength training, mobility. But the way that people do that can take, just a lot of forms. For example, you're into bar 3. That is one way to do that. I like to swing kettlebells and throw around barbells. That's another way to do that. Other friends like Feldenkrais and hiking. That's all of those things have a place, and it's figuring out what combination of modalities work for you. And then what are we looking at in terms of your, I'd say air quotes, goal playing time. If it's May right now, people are looking at starting an orchestral playing in the fall. We need to get players able to potentially play 2 to 5 hours a day of orchestra, hypothetically.
Right.
So how can we gradually increase whatever it is that you're doing to get to that point before the rehearsals start?
Yes.
Not even necessarily in shape in an air quotes way like Guns of Steel or I can play as well as I did a year ago. It's more like, are you physically prepared in terms of endurance, stamina, concentration? That's huge. Oh my God, concentration is so hard after not doing that for a year. Mm-hmm. And are you able to sit for 2.5 hours? When I have played this spring, once or twice in orchestra, it's been like, oh, I'm not used to sitting for 3 hours.
Yes. Yes.
I love that you're pointing this out because I think a lot of people think of the movement part when they think about getting back in shape, but they don't think about what to do for, the lack of mobility, the being caught in a position for a certain amount of time, and how do you keep yourself limber? I love this.
Yeah. Sitting for an hour and a half is actually not that normal without changing your position. Mm-hmm. Not recommended by professionals. And it's what we do. And how do you introduce micro movements when the conductor's talking to the flute and the oboe about tuning? How do you wiggle around your chair without looking like a total sociopath?
Yes.
That could be twisting. That could be side bending. That could be focused attention on your breath. That could be doing a shoulder shrug or circle. Also, to me, it's totally illogical to sit in a chair for an hour and a half and then immediately walk to the break room and sit down. I'm like,
sit down.
Not what I want to be doing.
Same.
Yes.
Same.
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan of walking. Whatever helps you move well in your body. Maybe that's a forward fold. I really like hip hinges, which is basically like a deadlift. Or if you know yoga, it's like an utkatasana. That's really nice. A deep squat is nice. Different ways to move your body around. Just giving yourself these little movement snacks.
Movement snacks.
Yes.
I love that.
I know. I love that too.
That's amazing. I just love that visual.
The movement itself is important, but you reference this concept that we are connecting ourselves to our body and we are starting to listen to our bodies a little bit more and understand what we need. This is how I have prevented injury for myself in the last 3 years.
I think it actually gets down to your awareness of your body. And so there's a couple pieces in terms of kind of a sciencey perspective. There is your proprioception, your awareness of your body in space. There's your interoception, that's the awareness of your internal body. So like thirst and hunger and things like that. I think also understanding a little bit about pain science can go a long way for musicians. But you can do any kind of exercise, including yoga, with like zero awareness. You can just hoist yourself into your vinyasa or your Bikram poses or whatever to achieve an aesthetic shape without really being aware of the sensations. You can also do anything with incredible awareness. And that was a very important distinction for me. You can run and be really aware of sensation. You can strength train. You can do whatever you want. But if you bring in this lens of awareness, how does this feel? Is this the right weight for me? Can I do this movement, this motor activity with control? Is it too challenging? Do I need to progress it, make it more complicated? Do I need to regress it, make it less complicated?
That's so true. And I think this goes into further understanding who you are and what you want to do for movement, because it was a long journey for me. Once viola became my main interest as a young person, athletics really just disappeared from my life. Mm-hmm. And it took me into my 30s to find something that I love to do and then consistently do it.
Yeah.
I think this is true for a lot of people, just trusting. I know people say that all the time, and I can remember it wasn't that long ago in my life that people would say that very thing to me, and I'd be like, yeah, you say that I'm going to find something I like, but I've not yet done that, and it will happen.
Yeah.
Try different things, as you said, and having that mindfulness about what's happening with your body when you do it. And if it feels good, great. And if it doesn't feel good, it's probably something you shouldn't be doing. Mm-hmm. It seems simple, but it's really, really a big deal.
The thing too is that, like Liz, you said that you found this thing that you love to do now, but that may not be the case always.
Yeah.
So it's being open to changing and to letting your fitness evolve. Like in my 20s, I was really into cardio kickboxing, like when that was like the big thing. I've gone through a spinning phase. I've been trained as a personal trainer and I've done serious weightlifting. But I think that for me, I've found that I have a very short attention span as far as organized exercise goes. Having a hybrid works for me. So don't give up and just keep trying different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wonder if you can explain a little bit about the field of somatics.
Sure.
During the pandemic, I was able to explore body mapping, Alexander technique, and I have not gotten into Feldenkrais. I keep saying I'm going to do it, and then I don't. So everyone who knows me who's listening to this is like, yeah, I remember when I talked to you about that 4 months ago.
I haven't done any of these things.
This is another layer of that awareness within your body.
Sure.
Pretend like you're talking to a complete novice, because that's me.
So let's dial back and say, what does the word somatic even mean?
Yes.
Because I think that's really important.
So important. Thank you.
So it's based on the Greek word soma, S-O-M-A. The body as distinct from the soul, mind, or psyche, from the Oxford Dictionary, just FYI. It describes a lot of different practices. And so I think what's confusing both as musicians and whatever you teach, it shows up in psychology and therapy and all sorts of stuff. There are a lot of different somatic practices. So you mentioned Alexander technique, and Alexander technique is really what led the founder of body mapping to create that work. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an offspring of Alexander technique. You don't have to be an Alexander technique teacher to teach body mapping, but it is very much related to that. Feldenkrais was actually a human, Moshe Feldenkrais. So what I like about Feldenkrais personally is it's a lot of open-ended questions. The client doesn't need to respond, or the student, or whatever language you want to use, but it's a lot of self-guided inquiry and exploration. Alexander technique was also based on a dude, F.M. Alexander. He was an actor. He was having issues with his voice, basically being hoarse and constantly tired. And so his work is really based on this concept of primary control. So how the head and the neck are integral to movement, and he kind of has his own own body of work related to that. But in terms of other somatics, there's tons of other stuff. There's something called somatic experiencing. There's the work of Bonnie Bainbridge-Cohen. There is somatic yoga. There's dance-based somatics. There's Hannah, like there's just tons of stuff.
Wow.
Basically all these different people looking at the intersection of bodily awareness, cognition awareness. And so it's a big, vast rabbit hole, and everyone finds what they like.
Yeah, the ability to look around and see if something fits, if something works for you. From a novice standpoint where I don't know a lot about it, but I know how it relates in my own life, whether it's playing viola or actually just standing up out of a chair, I have used it to explore emotional stuff, understanding that actually your emotions are a bodily response, and then your mind assigns stories to those emotions, but your cognitive mind, that is. It's like an extra layer almost. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think some of the somatic work is based on just expanding your sensory awareness and refining it. I think some of it is based on tapping into memory. So that gets into a different part of the brain, amygdala and hippocampus. So amygdala is fear, hippocampus is kind of memory, which is looking at how maybe motor patterns are stored in memory. So we all have habits, and the way that you do things is remembered. That's what we think of as muscle memory, but it's really your brain, it's neuron memory. So I think that's part of it. And then there's all these other pieces, like there's coordination, and that's governed by the cerebellum, and like there's all these other things.
Yeah, memory and how we move and related to memory. And I saw Stephanie do this nod, and I was thinking about this with respect specifically to playing an instrument or singing. With respect to playing, I think there's so much that we sort of internalize somehow, and then it's just we instinctively pick the instrument up the same way, or when we shift, we do the same movement that may or may not be harmful to us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot with that too. And that gets into a whole other side of the somatic conversation, which is what is trauma? What is the way that we teach? What is the pedagogy of learning? And I think when we have certain habits with our instrument, sometimes I think they're rooted in someone telling us the right way to do it and really dictatorial teaching rather than that sense of exploration or autonomy or things like that. So I think sometimes when we look at people with a really strong, I'd say, tension response to playing their instrument, I think there is a component of someone at some point telling them, well, this is how you do it. You should always do it that way. Don't be an idiot. And I think that's something that we're starting to uncover in music and starting to talk about. And that's not healthy from a physical perspective or a neurological perspective. So even if you're not in this kind of trauma-informed space, one of the things that's really important in that kind of approach to teaching, whether it's yoga or weightlifting or music, is autonomy and giving people choices. So letting people be their own boss to some degree. So let's say you've got that middle schooler who's an intermediate player. A dictatorial approach would be like, well, all of my students play without a shoulder rest.
Yes.
We've heard that. We've seen that. That's illogical from a physical standpoint because everyone's body's different. Every instrument's different. Every viola is a different size. I mean, that's totally bananas. A different approach is, let's see if we can find a setup that works for you. Let's try a bunch of stuff. A different pedagogical approach is like, all of my students play this rep. You have to play these pieces in the classical canon. This is how you do it. That's also super common for intermediate advancing high school students. A different approach is like, well, what pieces do you want to play? What music do you like? It doesn't have to be classical. Opening up this conversation to autonomy and creativity and freedom, that also relates to physical tension. And I think most string players can relate. When they play excerpts, they become tighter because they have been told so many times by so many people, you have to do it this way. You have to be in tune. You have to be in time. You have to have the right stroke. And it's really interesting when you watch even high-level players, if they do a mock for you, you'll often notice that their solo playing is really different from their excerpts because they're suddenly getting in this really small box. The habit is also sometimes rooted in fear or shame, which is also really important and complicated.
That resonates and will resonate with a lot of people. That feeling of putting yourself in a box to do a certain task.
Yeah.
And the amount of tension that elicits. I also think it's kind of an unvoiced opinion that not every student in a studio needs to play the same rep. I think that a lot of teachers would think that their responsibility is to elicit musicality from their students, but also to advance their technique. There needs to be some kind of balance, you're saying, between finding a way to get the student across that finish line of learning a certain technique, but also being flexible in the way that you teach that technique to that student.
I think from a repertoire perspective, since we're all violists, I think that's a really easy one. Most college violists, all we hear is Hindemith, one of the 3 concertos, Bach, and 2 Brahms. And there's nothing wrong with any of that repertoire. It's all good repertoire. Like, I don't have a beef. I mean, some of the Hindemith I can do without, but whatever. It's all core repertoire. But then that's all dead white men.
Yeah.
So, like, what's missing? And, what does the student want to play? Like, I think there's kind of a compromise. Your teacher can say, like, hey, we only have 3 concertos, really. Like, you got to learn them all at some point. I think it's useful to learn them in school. But you can also be like, cool, I really want to play the Takamitsu piece, or I really want to play this Joan Tower piece, or I want to do the Jesse Montgomery Rhapsody. I think there are ways that college teachers in particular can look at a way to compromise and discuss both your technical goals for the student and the repertoire goals. In 4 years, you can accomplish that and also learn some pieces that are really important and meaningful to the musician.
When do you think that can start? I'm thinking of these middle school students.
I think it can happen at that point. So I had a really interesting Instagram live with a violinist here in Seattle, Sarah Pizzakemi, and she has put together a repertoire list for Suzuki violin supplementation, looking at female BIPOC composers, ways to supplement a very white male-driven pedagogy. She's doing that with violinists of all ages and abilities, and also opening up that question to, like, what do you want to learn? And I feel like, especially with little kids and middle schoolers, they actually have music they want to learn. And it might be Let It Go from Frozen. It also might be an Arcade Fire song, or it might be something else. But there's nothing wrong with that. And I think we need to give them some freedom and also acknowledge that there's value in that. Because middle schoolers, if they want to learn a pop song, they might have to arrange it. They might have to write it in alto clef. They might have to look at what chords be.
Oh, this is so awesome. I'm doing a lot of full body nod right now. I can't. With your colleague who you talked with, and we actually have a friend here who's a powerhouse violin studio teacher, Claire Allen, who's also a listener. Hi, Claire. Who has done some work in the last, I would say 3 years or so, compiling resources for her students with music of female and BIPOC composers of all various levels. So this is an important thing, I think, is that teacher resource aspect, right?
Yeah.
So if you are a teacher who wants to offer ways to expose your student to all that the repertoire has to offer, aside from the dead white guys, who I agree, we all love them. It's amazing repertoire, but it's not the only repertoire. And having these resources is very helpful. I will also say that in my own experience in teaching, I will say I'm not great about, and this is my programming, if somebody came to me with an Arcade Fire song and was like, I want to learn this, I would be like, yeah, great. Go learn it on your own time. You can do that. You don't need me. That's not what we do here. And I've had students who take it upon themselves. I have had students who arrange rock tunes for themselves or for duo or whatever, and they get really creative. I also have a student right now, when she was learning her sonata for auditions, she's like, I want to learn Clark. I said, okay, let's do it. She did great. Encouraging that individuality, we would be very surprised to find what they're capable of.
Yeah.
Especially if they have a vested interest, even if, Kayleigh, you've been referencing the intermediate player, you know, the one who's not necessarily going to go into music full time. Well, then why would we be funneling them into all sorts of repertoire that's meant to give someone a leg up in looking for a career in music? Why wouldn't we be encouraging their individuality in that way? It's a really great thought.
Yeah.
Really great.
One piece that comes back for me is when I was doing my master's at Eastman, I taught students that were exclusively on the autism spectrum, and they were mostly younger, but a couple sort of middle schoolers, and they were all at a beginning level. They weren't all viola. There was some violin, there was some piano. What was really interesting to me as a teacher, and I had worked in a, I would say, special education capacity before, was that if I tried to impose any kind of expectation, like we're going to learn Mary Had a Little Lamb, it kind of all went down in flames. But if we found out what they were interested in, they exceeded my wildest expectations. So that was part of it for me, is like having a relatively nonverbal, like 6-year-old be obsessed with Miley Cyrus or Phineas and Ferb. And then what I did was I would find a way to make that music accessible for him. Do I like Miley Cyrus? No. But finding a way to make that something he could learn. And then my goal is for him to find something that he is engaged in, that he can create a movement experience, because it was really about cognition and movement and coordination for them, that is meaningful, and then acknowledging that he really enjoys listening to music. So if I have listened to some of that stuff, I can talk to him about it. So I think some of that can apply to any audience, but it was really interesting to see that, because it's like these kids don't care necessarily about Beethoven, and why should they? They want to learn what they want to learn, and I think that's true for tons of kids and tons of audiences. Is like, we try to force a certain perspective on them that classical music is this great, amazing, epic thing. And in fact, music is much broader and much wider. And it doesn't have to be about Beethoven. It could be about music of West Africa. It could be whatever. And I actually think that we as classical teachers could do better in just acknowledging the value of all these other traditions and letting kids talk about it. Be like, did you listen to this Kronos quartet from the 1992 where they played music with Ravi Shankar? And what about this, Balinese piece? I think we can actually do way better in classical music land in acknowledging that there's tons more out there than our very, very narrow scope. Encourage kids to listen, encourage them to bring stuff in. And if it's outside of your scope, send them to YouTube, contact a colleague. I couldn't teach someone how to fiddle if my life depended on it, but I'm more than happy to be like, go take a Skype lesson with this person.
Yes.
See what they have to say.
That's so good. If a student is encouraged from a very early age to explore what really resonates with them naturally, and sure, if someone decides, I want to go to school for music performance, they have to be at a certain skill level and they have to be willing to put that work in. But that might look different. If you don't get through the entire Kreutzer Etude book with them, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to have a successful career in music. It's a really great thing to explore. I just love it. Mm-hmm. So, Kayleigh, in terms of understanding movement and students, you came in and presented virtually to my youth program. And my members just adored what you did with them. And it was eye-opening for them. And that's grades 7 through 12. So they're clearly interested in it. I sort of take for granted that I've been so interested in it myself that we just don't get exposed to. So I wonder if you have thoughts about that too, practically as teachers, or if we are running youth programs, we have any involvement with young people learning music. How do we put that movement piece into it? Mm-hmm. How does that become more available for teachers themselves to understand and then put into their teaching?
I think the first part is that we need more education for professionals and teachers. Let's say you're a studio teacher. I don't think there's great information historically out there for you in terms of understanding anatomy and anatomy of setup. Part one is, I think, educating music educators of whatever flavor they are. I think that's a really important thing. And I think if you don't have a huge movement background, that's totally fine. I think that's where hiring guests comes in. Meanwhile, educating yourself. If you're in a capacity to program and coach high schoolers or middle schoolers or whatever age, I think it's also important to talk about the repertoire we program. And I think that's also true for professionals. But most youth orchestras are not particularly conscientious about how much they rehearse and what they're rehearsing. So let's say they have a 2.5 to 3 hour rehearsal. Let's say they're doing Shostakovich 5. I have been in many a rehearsal where you just kind of blast full tilt for quite a while. That is a conversation worth having with music directors of that age group. These people also have physical bodies, and the way that we're rehearsing, or the chairs they're sitting on, or this tiny space they're rehearsing in, is also affecting their body, and they don't have the language or the rhetoric to advocate for themselves. So that's really important, especially when we talk about hearing, because I worked in NEC prep, and I don't think we ever really thought about how close the violas were to the trombones, or whether the trumpets were right on top of the bassoonist. Nobody really thinks about what the consequences are for those players, and no one ever talks about wearing earplugs. Even if these kids don't want to go into this as their vocation, we have a responsibility to at least being cognizant of musician health issues as pertains to this group of people. So that's kind of the first two things. And then I think from a private studio instructor perspective, in addition to learning more and being more aware, I think you need to talk about how you practice. No one really teaches kids how to practice. No one really teaches you how to do your homework. You just kind of like fill out some worksheets. No one tells you what you're doing. Like that doesn't come up. And so I love the work that Molly Gebrian has done. She's another violist.
Yes.
It's this really important conversation of saying to a kid at any age, okay, you have this issue. How are you going to practice it? Walk me through it. What do you want to accomplish when you practice? And how long you're going to practice? Because I also feel like some students just like put off practicing for a couple days and then they like practice an hour and 20 minutes. And we all know that that's not that effective as teachers. We've experienced it teaching games to 6-year-olds or talking to middle schoolers about setting a timer or whatever. Like it can take so many different forms, but I think that's another piece of it that's really important.
And breaking down the practice into, here's how you warm up.
Mm-hmm.
Who talks about warming up? I don't think any teacher I've ever had, and I feel pretty confident saying this, has ever talked about warming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really big hole. I know that some teachers do this.
Yeah.
Don't at me. But none of mine did.
And that's okay. I think mine did, but I don't necessarily think that's indicative of the entire music career.
Right. I feel like even if, my high school orchestra director, she would make us stretch before rehearsal. And I remember being 15 and thinking, I don't need to do this. Like, let's just play.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just want to play the viola. Like, why do I have to do this right now?
Oh, yeah. I never missed it.
Yeah, this concept of like putting it in the foundation. And I try to say this to my own students, that you might not notice it right now. You might not notice that playing for 2 hours straight is going to hurt your body, but I promise you down the road, that is going to hurt your body, because a teenager, not only do they not have the knowledge, but I think they have enthusiasm. If you have a kid that's playing in Shostakovich 5, they just want to play.
Yeah.
So they're going to go full force for you for as long as you want them to. And it almost suggests that that's taking advantage of their youth in a way, instead of being like, hold up, let's just keep in mind that we are dealing with smaller humans, but they're still humans with bodies that get injured. And I got tendonitis my senior year of high school because I was always full force. I never didn't have that awareness. I don't know if I could have had it, but maybe if it starts from the very beginning, if it's like incorporated from the second you pick the instrument up, that is to me so important. And the idea of having guests, you know, Kayleigh, my kids were sending us notes and talking to their private teachers who then told us, wow, whoever that was, like they made some kind of impression.
It's very prevalent in the sports field.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too.
Or is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to talk about sports.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, because I mean, you never see them just making a high school track team. Okay, ready? Start running.
Right.
There's always warming up.
Yeah.
But I think that acknowledging that music and playing of music is a physical feat, I don't think that people really recognize that. It's like the golf phenomenon. You know, they think you sit in a chair. It's not a sport, but it's a very active thing.
There's some interesting pieces to unpack with that. So I think part of it is that sports medicine has evolved a lot in the last 30 years in the time that we've been alive. And I think more than information has come to the high school level. So I would say when I was in high school in the early 2000s, we air quote stretched, but it was kind of trash. It wasn't that great. And what I know now is way better as a personal trainer and whatnot. But I think there's a lot of information that has come to that high school elite level, and I don't think it's come down into music. I think that sports medicine, which actually has a lot of intersections with performing arts medicine,
Totally.
I don't think has necessarily made it. So that's part one. But part two of that, I think, is that to your musician students, they're very resilient. And their bodies are changing very quickly. So they generally have questionable awareness because suddenly their arm is like an inch longer than it was 6 months ago. Like,
Right.
They don't know. Everything's changing. Like they have no idea what's going on. And so I think that's part of it, is that their awareness is still very much being refined and their body is changing rapidly. But I don't think we're doing a great job of explaining to them that moving before you play your instrument can help you play better. I think that's the really big piece, is that yes, we're doing this to prevent injury, but they don't really care a lot of the times. Like they slump in their chair.
They're invincible.
Yeah, they drink soda with 60 grams of sugar. Like that's not really on the radar. But if you can make a connection with something tangible that they care about, which is playing their piece better, then I think they're likely to buy in.
That's right.
Key.
Yep.
And I think the other piece of it is that most of our Western education is aimed at teachers or coaches telling kids what to do without really inviting their response.
Yes.
It gets into this whole like capitalist thing is we're teaching kids how to be workers and not really like feel their feelings or what they think. We're trying to teach them to be well-disciplined people. And what we're kind of talking about is opening up or peeling that back earlier and saying, well, what do you think? And this actually has different consequences, and let's talk about that. And I think that's also hard for people to acknowledge and investigate.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a lot easier to tell a teenager, just do this thing.
Oh, yeah.
Or to tell a middle schooler, just do this thing, than deal with what they want or their input on the other side of that.
I'm so glad you said this. This is loosely my philosophy for teaching, which I am a question asker, and actually it frustrates me when I have kids who have no formed opinions or seem like they don't know how to think. Sometimes I have students that are great with that. Like, I'm like, okay, I want you to spend the time thinking about what you want to do here and then come back and talk to me. And if there are issues that we need to work out, we'll work them out. But I'm not holding your hand, especially once they get to a certain age. But even my littlest ones, when something goes wrong, I don't immediately say, hey, this is what you need to do better. I will ask them the question, what do you think went wrong there?
Same.
They have much more insight in their own minds, even at a very young age, than I think historically we give them credit for. And I haven't thought about it from the perspective of sort of the society that we live in and how we're training them more to be disciplined workers than we are to be independent thinkers. But that's a big one.
It gets into capitalism and anti-capitalism. If you've lived in the world and you've read the internet, you know that critical thinking is in need in our society.
Yeah.
There's a lot of dictatorial teaching that doesn't necessarily empower that sense of creativity and self-empowerment type work.
I love it.
Yes. Got to change the world one little step at a time. So, Kayleigh, if you were to suggest for anyone who's interested in exploring this like world of movement from a root point, are there things you would recommend to them?
I think it depends on what they're interested in. I do think it's useful for musicians to learn anatomy, and I think that can take many forms. Taking an anatomy course for musicians, that's something that my podcast co-host has just launched, an Anatomy for Musicians course.
Cool.
There's also, you can take body mapping, which will give you some aspects of anatomy. I do think musicians should at least have a basic understanding of anatomy, just for the purposes of teaching students and understanding, and also being able to see things in bodies, because I think part of that, let's say someone's setup isn't working or they're doing something funky with their shoulder. If you can't figure out or even articulate what that is to yourself, how are you going to articulate it in a way that they can change it or understand what the goal is? That would be my first thing. I wish that musicians were empowered to find movement or fitness that they enjoyed without fear. And what I mean by that is, there's often a lot of rhetoric in music schools like, oh, don't do that, you'll hurt yourself. That happens, I think, for every instrument, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on that in Instagram. People should be empowered to try whatever they want. And with the dominance of learning on the internet, you can try a class in just about anything.
That's true.
And if you don't like the teacher, turn it off. Go on with your day. It's totally fine.
Yep.
There's never been a more risk-free way to try different things. Personally, I am pretty against any fitness professional that does a lot of body shaming or weight loss rhetoric, so I would generally stay away from that kind of stuff. Try to look for someone or some discipline that's empowering people to be at the level that they're at in terms of skill and the body that they're at, and who respects whether it's your need to scale things for your upper body or for an injury or whatever. That's kind of the only thing I really care about, is teachers who respect students' abilities, respect their body, aren't pushing some external agenda of like, do more, do faster, what's wrong with you, you're too big, too small, too weak. Like, that's kind of the only hard passes I have in terms of coaches of any modality. So that's kind of it. But everything else, as far as I'm concerned, is fair game. If it's tap dancing, if it's ballet, you do you. Just find someone who respects what you bring to the table as a human.
Great. Where can we find your partner's Anatomy for Musicians?
So her name is Dr. Janice Yang, and her website is opuspt, as in opusphysical.com. And for those of you who don't know, our podcast is Beyond the Practice Room. So yeah, she just started that, I believe, a week and a half ago. So you can join in or join the next cohort.
Awesome.
That's perfect.
And favorite anatomy book is called The Trail Guide to the Body. It's used a lot in massage therapy and yoga trainings, but it's a great book, super fun, more fun than a lot of other books. Or playing around with anatomy apps, also really fun.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, Kayleigh, thank you so much for joining us today. And anyone who's listening can find you on Musicians Health Collective.
Mm-hmm. I'm also presenting at the Body Mapping Conference, and then I'll do another workshop in June with Janice. So I exist on the internet in many forums.
Just go to musicianshealthcollective.com, right?
Yep. Or you can send me an email. My name, KayleighMMiller @gmail.com. I'm also on Instagram at KayleighMM. My name's spelled weird, but once you find it, the only other person with Kayleigh Miller is the girl from the movie The Butterfly Effect with Ashton Kutcher.
What?
Yeah, if you Google me, that's you either get The Butterfly Effect or you get me.
That's hysterical.
But otherwise, if you look up Kayleigh Miller and viola, I'm it. That's all you get.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure, well, I know exactly what movie you're talking about. There's a certain generation of us that will know exactly what you're talking about.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for making time.
Thank you so much for listening to the Viola-Centric podcast. If you enjoy what you're hearing and would like to support us, please consider a contribution through the PayPal or Venmo links in our episode notes. Once again, I'm Liz O'Hara-Starr.
And I'm Stephanie Knutson. We release new episodes every other Monday, so please subscribe so you don't miss one. In the meantime, connect with us on Facebook and on Instagram and email us at violacentric@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening.